us this conversation on equity in education. As I mentioned, my last month, we started this conversation speaking on how we bring equity and inclusivity into our communities. Today, we are joined by Mr. Norman Coulter and Chloe Jones to speak specifically on how we can bring equity into education. And I'm interested in this conversation, not just on a like statewide and national scale, where there's lots to talk about as far as like policy and problems on the issue of equity and diversity. But I'm especially interested in hearing from Chloe and Mr. Coulter because the issues are prevalent in Bonita Unified School District also. And to give a little background on why this conversation is urgent, it's not just about me, but this is also about me because I have a 5-year-old who will be starting school at the Bonita in BUSD. And in researching what school I would want to take her to, and in talking to former students of color, I don't know if I want to send my student, my daughter, to Bonita Unified School District because I spoke to students who graduated from Bonita, from San Dimas High a couple years ago, and multiple Black women who shared horrible stories of what they experienced through the school district. And so I want to know what the school district is doing to ensure that my 5-year-old doesn't experience the same things, that no other student experiences the same things. So Mr. Coulter, if you could introduce yourself and what you do at San Dimas, what you do in this space, and then Chloe, after he concludes, if you could go ahead and introduce yourself as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Brittany. And thank you for having us here. And I appreciate it being here with all of you tonight. I am an English teacher over at San Dimas High School. I'm currently the instructional lead, which is basically the chairperson of the English department. So I lead our ELA team over at San Dimas High School. I'm in year 5, going on year 6 when we start up next year. And in this space, when we deal with DEI stuff, I'm probably one of the newest members, if not the newest member of our equity committee in Bonita Unified School District, which Christine Black leads, who's here tonight. Thank you for being here, Chris. We may be joined later by Tamika Carter, who's also on that committee. And I may defer at times for some clarification on some things because they are more versed than me, been a part of the group longer, but I do sit on that committee. Also, away from the school space, I lead a group with my wife, who's also present tonight, is Jennifer. We, in fact, just ended a call every 2 weeks. We meet with our group on Facebook called A Tribe Called Change, and we really work in the space of dismantling systemic racist structures, trying to be creative about that and innovative, very grassroots and such. And so we try to promote dialogue that is responsible and intentional, yet provide a place for those who are on the spectrum of trying to learn and understand how these systems are created. There's a gross amount of ignorance. And so we just try to step into that space and do what we can. So that's kind of the formalized stuff. I'm a doctoral leadership researcher at Gonzaga University up in Spokane, Washington. So once upon a time, there was a lot of traveling in the summers. Now it's a little bit more remote, trying to move toward the end of that thing. But I work a lot currently with research on privilege, and currently am disseminating a privilege index survey, attempting to collect data. We're at about 300, close to 300 participants, trying to get to 600 to validate, the confidence level, but really just helping people to examine that privileges is not a statement of what kind of person you are. It just exists. Where it exists, you must work to stand against it and work to bring equity where that doesn't exist. So that's a little bit about me, passing the baton.
Hi, my name is Chloe Jones. I'm sorry if it seems a little bumpy or loud at times. I'm currently in the car driving to Riverside, but I am a high school senior at San Dimas High School for about 2 more weeks. I'm going to be attending Northern Arizona University this coming fall. Presently, I am the president of my school's Black Student Union, the treasurer for our activism club. I am also a part of the equity committee like Mr. Coulter. I am the student representative for my high school. And then just outside of all that stuff, I'm a student athlete, and I like to say that I'm a voice for the voiceless. And so I like to elevate the voices of my many friends or peers who have been experiencing problems and just felt ignored. And I like to make sure that their voices get heard as well as mine, because, you know, everybody deserves to be heard. And then my mom is here with me as well. She is just driving.
Thanks so much for joining us. So we do have about an hour for this program. So we like to be effective with our questions and answers. And as we finish those answers, I do love to open it up to everyone, specifically to discuss what actionable items we each can take. And I also certainly want to echo Mr. Coulter's welcome and thanks to Ms. Black, to everyone else from the committee and from the USD who has joined us today. Feel free, seriously, to jump in if you have something strong that you want to share in response to any of these as well. But first, Mr. Coulter and Chloe, I'm wondering if you can just to kind of give us this context. I mean, we all here know racism exists, inequities exist. We know that it exists everywhere, so it certainly exists in education. But what I'm interested in is if you could describe to me what made it clear, whether there's a specific instance or if it's just kind of a body of experiences, what's made it clear that inequity most certainly exists in Bonita Unified School District, where you're like, this isn't right.
Chloe, you want to jump in first, or how you want to do it?
I can go first.
Okay.
So I started to first realize that there was inequity in education, when I got to high school, mostly because in talking to a lot of my peers and thinking about some of the experiences that I went through as well, we began to see some consistency in the ways that we learned content as opposed to our counterparts who were not Black students. And so we would be focusing on, like, is this gonna be, am I going to have to deal with a racist comment in this class today? Or is this teacher gonna call me out for something today? Whereas everybody else is just like, hey, what am I learning today? What's this test on? So we always try to think of above and beyond instead of just like what the actual course content was.
Yeah.
And I think local to BUSD, obviously I came over from Riverside Unified, and I was a product primarily of the Inglewood and Los Angeles Unified School Districts, respectively, growing up. And even though you asked about Bonita, I my early experiences did shape kind of my understanding. I'm a little older than Chloe, so my induction to this whole inequity piece started a little bit longer ago in the 80s. And I got bused to school from 4th grade to 8th grade, primarily because there just simply was a gross disparity in the education that I could receive in my neighborhood as opposed to what I could receive in the same district, but an hour and a half away in Woodland Hills. So in the 4th grade, I lived in South Central Los Angeles, or now known as South LA, 48th and Avalon corridor. But I did get bused to school, and I could see a remarkable difference upon arrival in my preparation. I always read well, but I was just behind in so many ways, and the resources were different. The sense of safety obviously was a marked difference. I didn't necessarily feel wanted at first there, but there were a lot of guerrilla type advocates. I really want to applaud all of the people who do the hard work between the lines in education, because there's always some really good people on all campuses. But that was my first exposure, this notion of subpar resources, subpar facilities, coming from schools in the neighborhood I lived in that didn't have stall doors on bathroom stalls, so that you had to, hold it basically all day, and then get home and you know, that it was kind of a health issue. I mean, so lots of different issues, but in BUSD, more locally, one of the things I notice is just simple things. When you look at referral for discipline, when you look at disparity, you look at, say, 3% of a population on a campus representing about 10% of the referrals for discipline. Then you start to look at the comments. What kind of disciplinary referrals are taking place? I personally, you know, I don't think I've referred a student for disciplinary action, but I realize that there's a different affect, and, you know, classroom management varies by teacher, and I'm taller, and I don't know, you know, that could have something to do with it. I don't know, you know, I'm not sure, but I do look at that data. And if I look at, say, you know, the African-American population and the people who identify as white Hispanics on our campus, and you put them together and you see that they represent about 70% of our discipline referral, it, you know, data does that, right? It gets your attention. And so you start to go, well, is that an equity issue? You can't educate students who aren't in the classroom being suspended. You know, are we using PBIS? I can make it available. It's publicly. I had to do some airy stuff for Isabel in the chat. You know, it's just a matter of asking some nice people to run some reports for me. I think it's public. We're not using names. You know, it's just numbers. So, but those are the kind of things I think. As far as hard statistical stuff, you know, it doesn't take much to look at some of the analyses and see that AP testing, how many students of color actually enroll for AP classes. Who do they attempt to take those courses? Do they take the exam when they take those? When they take those courses, do they take the exam? You know, Chloe, I think you took something like 4 or 5 AP exams in your time at San Dimas. Like I saw your name on that list. But when you look at, say, African-American students and you go, well, only 15, it appears like 15 or so African-American students over the last 4 years are really the ones taking the brunt, or not the brunt, but taking the bulk of the AP tests for all the representation. That's strange to me, you know? So you look at things like that and you're not pointing a finger, you're just saying, hey, there's a problem with the system. And it makes you want to investigate that kind of stuff. Chloe, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to pop in really quickly and say the thing with the AP exam, it's actually kind of evident. I don't know if I'm breaking up, sorry, but you kind of notice it a lot that it's the same students taking the AP classes. Like, it's the same Black students taking the AP classes. So it's like, I've taken AP classes and AP tests in the past 4 years, and throughout that time, I've been with the same 3 kids, 4 kids in all of them. And so you really start to see the change, because there are a lot of Black students on campus, like 3%, but it's the most I've been around. So you start to see this difference where I'm taking these AP classes, and there's 3 of us in these classes, and it's the 3 of us all the time just moving between these different courses together. And then you have a large majority of the African-American students that are just taking these basic classes and other ones. And I know that these students have the ability to take these classes, but it's like you get the support and stuff that they need to actually teach at the level where they're able to understand individuals.
Yeah. And I mean, those statistics are true across the nation, right? I studied education in college, and I remember all of the statistics about, I mean, I don't remember them by number, but not only the behavioral issues, them being more likely to be referred, then more likely to be suspended, more likely for it to escalate. And then, like you said, Chloe, like less likely to be encouraged by counselors, perhaps, to look a certain direction. And I mean, Mr. Holter brought up a really important point, is you really can't point fingers, right? I don't know a single teacher, or possibly even a single parent in the school district that would say, I've had this experience with this teacher, and this is where the systemic problem occurs. But when you take a step back and you look at that data, then you recognize there has to be a systemic issue occurring. And so it is my assumption that that's why this equity committee was created. Could you share a bit about, and I don't know, Mrs. Black, if you would want to jump in. I think Mr. Coulter said you've been on the committee since its inception. So I don't know if you'd rather pass the baton about how the equity committee was created, why it was created, and what specific goal or direction, what actionable items does it intend to take?
I'll be happy to give a little bit of background about it, but I would love to kind of tag team this along with Norman and Chloe and have us all sort of share together, because there's a lot to share. Just a little bit of background about myself. Christine Black. I am the very proud principal of Chaparral Vista High School, which is the only alternative education site in our district. I've been with the district almost 33 years. I started my career in Bonita Unified as a teacher at Bonita High School, went on to San Dimas High School. I was at San Dimas High School from 1994 until 2007, when I went up to the district office to, 2011, when I went to do some work at the district level as a coordinator of some programs. And I did not find that work completely rewarding and challenging. And so when the position came up to work with at Promise students at our continuation and opportunity schools, I was very excited to do that, because this idea of equity in education and making sure that all students are met where they're at and to provide them with what they need has always been a driving force for me professionally, from the time I've been in the classroom and now being an administrator of a site. So I was very honored to throw my hat in the ring to help get the equity committee off the ground for the district. This is its first year. We've been meeting since, I think, midway through September of last year, and the committee has met regularly without fail every 2 weeks. So I think we've kind of gotten a lot done. The formation of the committee was in response to the district recognizing that something has to be done. The conversation has to start, and we have to start collecting data and the information that we've been talking about here tonight, and be able to put that into some sort of action to help bring the focus to all of these DEI issues. The three things that the committee was charged with was, or that they were looking at, is this idea of data collection, professional development around DEI concerns, and then accountability. And so the accountability piece really falls within more of the HR at the district level, which is when we hear about issues related to staff or concerns with employees of the district around these issues, that there is some sort of accountability to it, that some of these things that maybe come our way that we hear about are not ignored, and that they're investigated thoroughly. And so with that piece of it, there were 9 administrators in the district that were trained to investigate claims such as these. So that's sort of where that is right now. So we feel prepared to be able to respond to any reports of concerns in that area. The part that the committee's really been working with is the data collection piece and the professional development piece. The first thing we did, I'll let Norman, you want to talk about what we did with Mark Rogers? You want to start with that on the data collection? Because we've done 2 really big things so far toward that end.
Yeah, but I think, Christine, you really could add some insights that I can't, because you were kind of the construction portion of that, and then I'll piggyback.
Okay, yeah, please feel free. And Chloe, you jump in too, okay, hon? The first thing unfortunately, this started in a year of a pandemic. And so as we look to collecting data, the typical sort of data that we would be collecting, things like the number of students referred, the kind of students that are being referred, the follow-up with regard to discipline, those sorts of things. We're in a very artificial, unique setting right now. And so that data for this year is not going to be very helpful. One thing we know we need to be prepared for is how data is input into ARIES, our student data information database, so that it can be easily queried. For example, an administrator, when they deal with cases of bullying or harassment, it's sort of at the discretion of the administrator how they perceive that to choose which one of those codes that they use. That's as far as that reporting goes, is in the coding. It then relies on the administrator writing very subjective and thorough narration in order for anyone to be able to follow up to really understand what the details of that incident were. And so the committee came up with a list of ways in which we can tag incidents so that it's more queryable. Did it involve bullying? Did it involve harassment? What was it around? Was it around racial issues, socioeconomic issues, gender issues, a whole wide variety of different sort of specifics so that we can really drill down and collect that data. And so we worked with Mark Rogers, who is our Senior Director of Pupil Services, and he took care of making sure that we now have choices within the student data set to be able to tag those and get that information. So that was the first thing that we did. Am I missing something there, Norman or Chloe, with regard to that?
No, I don't think so at all. It was that, which is huge. I just want to kind of speak to the implications, you know, because this is the kind of, I guess, it's both systemic, right? It was addressing a systemic issue, but you have to change the systematic approach, which in turn affects the system, right? So systematically, what you'll see in the subjective narratives that are pretty much at the discretion of any teacher that refers a student, it begins, you'll start to see in a lot of the data by discipline that, you know, you start getting a lot of repeaters, right? And you start seeing that the subjectivity with which teachers attempt to resolve issues that really are in their purview actually are being farmed out to an already overwhelmed disciplinary kind of administrating. So the clarity is crucial, you know, to reform, to recalibrate that is going to be crucial, because it's really at the whim of an instructor who might just have some kind of a proclivity or some kind of a sensitivity that is really quite, you know, I don't want to say ridiculous, but it could be anything. So there's that. Then you were probably about to speak to this, Christine, but the student perception survey, it was the next thing I believe we worked on with some scrutiny. And so we had members of the committee really work on a survey that was written in a way with the help of students like Chloe and I can't remember the name of our student from Bonita who's been helping as well.
Angeline Frank.
Angeline Frank, right. And they've been huge and just helping us to write the survey in such a way that it was easier to understand. So it had a good readability to it, but it's very exhaustive, and it's really about perception. And believe it or not, you know, this is one of the things that I liked when I joined the committee, was that perception tends not to have as much value when those perceptions are being communicated from underrepresented groups that don't have numbers as an advantage. So there's a numbers bias, right? And this kind of attempts to kind of bring some value to those perceptions. Obviously, it's for all students, but I believe it's anonymous, if I'm not mistaken, right? The way it's going to be administered.
They have the right to have it be anonymous. They can write their name if they choose, but it doesn't specifically ask for a name. Right.
So it was developed with all types really of discrimination in mind. This, you know, when we talk about equity, we're not just talking about racial issues. We're talking about how you identify sexual orientation wise, you know, mental health, you know, just a whole swath of realities that our students exist in. And so this, I don't remember, Christine, kind of when we are set to actually send that out.
Well, so as an advisory committee, we make recommendations to the executive cabinet and onto the school board for them to take action on. And so where it stands right now is I have shared that information with the executive cabinet. I think there is the feeling that, sort of along the same lines with in looking at any data from this year, the student perception survey really drills down to a lot of experiences that students, asking about their experiences that they've had in schools around this idea. And again, our kids have been home. They've been home since March. And so it's not really going to be necessarily reflective of anything that's recent. That doesn't mean that a student may not recall things that have happened in the past, and that information is very important. But there is a little bit of a recency concern with regard to if they make a comment about where did it happen, will we know if it was something that occurred outside the district and whatnot. So at this point, I don't see how it could possibly be administered between now and the end of the year. So those are the two kind of data collection pieces. Along with that, most of you know the core values of our district are equity, mastery, and a focus on results. And one of the things that the committee talked about was the word equity, as important as it is also kind of thrown around a lot these days. It's sort of a buzzword, and it may be something, it's easy for a district to say, well, hey, we're all about equity. But if we were to ask somebody, what does that mean? I think with the other core values, we can talk about what a focus on results means. We're going to look at that progress toward that 80-70 goal and see where we are with that each year. And we're going to measure that. Mastery, same thing. We can look at, credit earning, and we can look at GPAs, and we can look at, college admission data and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to equity, I think if you went up to anybody and you said, well, Bonita Unified, one of their core values is equity, what does that mean? I think you would get a lot of people's own perception for them, what it means, as opposed to maybe what the district believes it is. And so the committee spent a great deal of time writing a sort of a definition of what, or description really, of what equity means, that we are making a recommendation to the board to adopt and use it as a something that people, when they hear it, they're going to think of Bonita Unified, and it's personalized to what it is that we hope to see happen within our district.
And that's something that's still in the phase of being recommended to the school board, or to
It's been, so that the kind of the process is the committee makes recommendations, and that recommendation goes to the executive cabinet, and then it's within the executive cabinet to take it to the school board for them to decide, how and when to act on it, and what to adopt, and that.
Gotcha. Chloe, I see you have a point, but on that on the point of being recommended to the school board, I do want to make sure, Greg, maybe if you could be sure to flag us when that those items are coming up on school board meetings. We would want to ensure that we're calling in to express our support. Chloe, what was your comment to add to that?
So my comment to add to that was just that I feel like we also got to recognize that there have been recent events in the schools. So my sister, who is a freshman this year, actually experienced these inequities in education her first 2 weeks of distance education, with racist Zoom bombers logging into her classes. And as many people here know, because you're in the district, we've been in school in person for about a month now. And I know in-person students who are freshmen who have dealt with these inequities and being called racial slurs while on campus this past week. And so I feel like this kind of thing is just going to be a constant ongoing, whether you're going to be distance learning or you're going to be in-person learning, because even distance learning, I know I have some experiences that I have dealt with recently as well.
Yeah, and oh no, was there more?
I was just going to add that, and then in not counting the experiences from this year as well, we're going to be losing out on data from all of these seniors who are leaving, because we have experiences too, and they're just as important as the freshmen who are going to be coming in and next year's seniors. And so it's just a lot.
Yeah, and important to collect. Christine, was there more that you wanted to continue on the data collection point, or what professional development's gonna look like in the district?
So one other thing that we did was we've been looking for, we want to make a recommendation for a training schedule and suggestions for vetted trainers. So the equity committee brought in a member of CTA to sort of review a training on starting with implicit bias, kind of the very most basic foundational place to start, I think, for a lot of folks, with this idea of just opening their eyes up to perhaps their own unconscious bias. And we also brought in my school. I I have volunteered my school to work with a group called the Equal Justice Society that's located out of Oakland. They're not specific to education. They deal with, it's a group of attorneys who deal with all sorts of DEI rights in workplaces and everything. They're not specific to education, but they would really like to start getting into that realm. We got hooked up through a group called the Alliance for Children that we work closely with, who represents our students who live in foster care. And they have invited my school to be part of a network of schools where we can learn from them. And really importantly, they can learn from us about the practices that we use at our school, and hopefully be able to share some of our experiences in our programs with other schools. They also do trainings. And so we invited them to come in, meet with our group, and talk about the sorts of trainings that they can do. And the committee's recommendation is that we use a trainer from the CTA. And we've made a recommendation that we start with a district-wide focus and kickoff with presentations about this idea of equity, some training, and then each of the 13 school sites would look at data from their school site, their student perception surveys, and determine specific types of trainings that they feel that is basically put together a comprehensive needs analysis for trainings for their sites.
Gotcha. That's exciting. I'm glad to hear that, and I hope that it moves in quickly. I know that there's a process, but my hope for the committee is that will be the group of folks that are going to make sure that it doesn't get stuck in the process, right? Having trainings like this expand beyond one school and at every single school. And I'm wondering what challenges and hangups you have experienced or would foresee experiencing, right? Have you experienced some resistance of folks being like, we don't need this training, this is a waste of time? When you're talking about these issues, do folks seem like that doesn't happen here?
Yeah, I want to speak to that, but I wanted to honor Amanda's question in case it's more pertinent to what we're addressing now before we go into your next question. I see Amanda's hand is up.
Go ahead, Amanda.
Sorry, I wanted to, on the other something. Okay, I wanted to ask, when does the student survey go out? Like, to what students, what age? Are we starting with high school, middle school? Is it also pertaining to elementary school?
At this point, the intent of the committee was to start with one for secondary at the high school level.
Okay. Is there any intention to maybe develop it where it starts reaching out to like parents of elementary school kids that may also be experiencing the same kind of disparities and the aggressions from other students, other parents, PTAs, which are, I think, much more prevalent with, parents overseeing a lot of the kids at that age, and teachers are very influential at that point because you only have that one teacher and you're stuck with them. So I'm curious if there's any intention to maybe in the future, I know you guys have your hands full with the high school level already, but is there an intention to perhaps reach out further to the younger kids before they reach high school? So before they have to go through that, whole experience, I'm sure Chloe, I don't think Chloe was in Bonita Unified for elementary school, middle school, but I know for me as a parent, that's a concern. I have two kids. They're not, they're mixed. My husband is Taiwanese, first generation here. So I'm a little bit worried about how people will perceive some of their cultural things, like the food they bring if they pack a lunch, or when they have to do their family tree or something like that, how it will go over with that. I think it's just important to also recognize that it starts at that level. So by the time they hit high school, they've been dealing with that kind of harassment and that kind of bullying and that kind of mentality that by the time they reach high school, it just is deemed as normal, unfortunately. So
And
There absolutely is intention. That's the next stakeholder group. In fact, our next meeting is this Tuesday, and we are inviting several of the mental health counselors from throughout the district to come and share with the committee what exactly kind of issues they hear from the students themselves and from parents that they work with, because the next thing that we're going to be tackling is the idea of education for parents. Bringing in training for them and to help them deal with exactly what you just described, Amanda.
Yeah. And to circle back to your question, Brittany, about the resistance, I don't think you have to go very far to see that kind of resistance in the demographic that we serve. I think that San Dimas is, some would call it a purple community, you know, on the political spectrum. I'm not sure I'm convinced of that just yet. But what I will say is this, what's the tough part about microaggressions and things of that nature, obviously, is that it's a conscience combined with, it's a conscience issue, but it's combined with, you know, the fixed policy recalibrations that you can enact to try to protect students from pre-K to senior year in high school. And one of the things that I've been lobbying hard for, I'm thankful for the work of the Equity Committee, because I really think in a year they have covered a lot of ground, and now that I'm a part of it, it's not they, it's we. But I really appreciate these efforts in trying to diagnose, because these are very much diagnostics. We have to see what's here. We have to validate perception, which is something that has to be a cultural value. It kind of isn't, you know. I mean, we really have a lot of work to do, not only with validating perception as it pertains to inequities toward I guess the usual groups that tend to be discriminated against, but also our English language learners, and the ability to advocate from pre-K to 12 for those students. And we have a constant inflow of students. I run our ELD Academy at San Dimas, and we only recently have the resources we need. And now we are finally kind of, as we meet the need, then we're seeing that there are more of those students, right? But what I've been saying a lot in some of my conversations with Carl Coles is that I believe that performative work has to happen prior to, or at least at the same time as, implicit bias training. Usually the people who don't want the training are the very people who need it the most. And oftentimes the person that has kind of this aggrandized view of themselves and thinks, well, I'm an educator and I treat everybody the same. I was like, yeah, and that's just the problem. We're not talking about equality. Equity is not the same as equality. We're talking about access and opportunity. And if you don't value, for instance, a student I had a conversation with today, remain nameless, but Chloe knows who he is. He's in the concentricity of being in some of the most discriminated against demographics in the history of our country. Black, male, identifies as gay, fostered. I mean, those layers, if there's any number of subjectivity in the way you treat a student like that, even in one of those categories, but he has all four, you can see how problematic that would be if we didn't deal with performatively getting people to the table and what that looks like. So one of the things I'll be suggesting, and I'm not trying to be self-promotional, but I really do, I kind of want to, I think there needs to be a position in our district where we devote some individualized, a role to being a liaison between all 13 of our campuses to do that performative work, because the training means nothing if people show up because they only because they have to. So getting people to examine data and take this objective lens, which is the purpose of the committee, is to say, hey, let's take emotion out of it. We know that privilege is a trigger, right? Now, I don't have a problem with any of those terms, but we know that in the reality, these are conversation points that people like to avoid, because equality is a much more comfortable thing to espouse. So I think some of the best work that we can do right now is to take, not really focus on the resistance, but to say, what is, okay, so you're a detractor, or you don't believe this is real. Is it that you don't believe privilege is real? We have to allow forms and places for these conversations to lead to healthy confrontations and courageous conversations that currently I think maybe aren't taking place district wide. And it has to, and I think the Equity Committee is going to play a key role in that, but I am trying to actually trying to get myself out of the classroom so I can play a role to be a little bit more hands-on, because we have our work cut out for us if we're going to maintain what would probably be a 3 to 5 year effort here.
Yeah, I think that's great. Chloe, you had something to add on that?
I just wanted to add that I've seen pushback in the fleur-de-lis, as everybody knows, it's commonly associated with the saint. And in Louisiana, it was written in the slave codes that it was also used to brand slaves, my bad. And so this summer, I put a lot of effort into creating a presentation to actually get the symbol banned from being used at my school, because it was everywhere, on shirts, Letterman jackets, everywhere. And so I hear my track teammates talk about it, and that we have to move our easy up a certain way so that the sign is not projected. And I hear students go, well, that's because it's racist. But there's little sneers and jabs that we hear around campus, and it's almost like you want to make a change, but then the people who the change isn't going to affect just think that the things that you're working for are a joke. And so the student who Mr. Coulter was actually talking about earlier, who happens to be a really good friend of mine, and I were speaking today with somebody else about this, and we talked about the fact that we come from certain demographics. So like me and one of my other friends are both Black women, and he is an LGBTQ Black male. And we were all talking about the fact that we are almost forced to grow up at a quicker rate than our counterparts who are not Black, because society almost pushes like so much on us from such a young age that you just got to deal with it, you got to deal with it. And then we get comments as we get older, like, you're so mature for your age. And we're like, no, it's not that we are mature, it's that we are expected to be this way to deal with some of the things that we talked about. And Mr. Coulter also brought up something about how people want to focus on equality, equality, equality. I actually had a conversation with a mentor of mine in a group discussion we were having, and she said something that's kind of just stuck with me for a while. It's that everybody always says that they treat all their students the same and all this stuff in education, and yet there are still some teachers who need special training on how to treat Black students. There should be no special training on how to treat Black students. Equity would be, there's no training, everybody truly is treated the same, and yet we live in a society where we say, I want to change this, I want to change this, yet there's no actual change, and people are not treated the actual same, and there's so much training that goes into people having to be treated the same, or so many experiences that one has to experience for people to be treated the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I just want to thank and honor your boldness in speaking so frequently. I mean, over this past year and a half, I've heard you speak and share on a numerous events related to the district and community at large. And my pleading to other community members that do have resistance is like, believe people, right? Like when Chloe shares what she's experienced on campus, believe her, right? And that's literally what it takes to move from a disbelief to ally. And then how do we move people from ally to advocate? And I think I'm interested in knowing, what can we, this group of believers, of allies, what can we do as community members, as BUSD parents, to advocate for these efforts? And I would like to get suggestions from you and then the group at large on what we can actually do to ensure that this effort moves forward.
Well, I would like just jump in on that and say, from a community's perspective, even some of my colleagues admit that they've heard very little about the fact that an equity committee even exists, right? And so we're a year post George Floyd, and these things can't be mythical. You know, I mean, you look at Chafee Joint out at Rancho Cucamonga High School, they have, and it's a little bit more narrow, but I love that they're being intentional, that they have an African-American Parent Advisory Council, APAC, and they're doing some things to just demystify and kind of, you know, bring some of that into a real normalizing, you know. And thank you, Mrs. Leeming. Leslie saying nothing has been said to the staff about, right. So we really need the word to get out that this is a response to the reality. I think even with data, like I'm sorry, that's the wrong link, but I'll put in the privilege index that my colleague and I are working on. Matt Ween talks about this a lot, he's an executive cabinet member. Like we talk about how when people don't believe in something, they either need to be touched by it, or they need, like they have family members that are, the being the recipient of the injustice, or they need to get close enough to the data to understand that this is objective data. There's no, where it's difficult to dispute gross disparities, like I mentioned earlier, with 3% of the population representing 10% of the referrals at a high school, right? There has to be things that are kind of very difficult to argue with, that are accompanied by the narratives, accompanied by the anecdotes, because it's easy to turn, you don't have to listen to me talk. I've had plenty of those experiences, but you can support us by kind of spreading the awareness that it exists, that the equity committee is in process, that, when people have these concerns, they can make these things known. Christine Black, Mark Rogers, the committee has been instrumental in talking about making it as easy as possible on our BUSD website for people to address these concerns and know where to begin when that reality presents itself. So we really, the data is going to be very important, being able to continue to bring this notion of privilege and equity, because they really do go hand in hand, into space, because we already have, the beauty of what we have with BUSD is that it's already, the ideology has already been codified, right? So we have it in writing now. Now we have to make sure that when we go to cash this check, that no NSF, right? And that's going to be up to us to validate, but we have it on paper. It's like, we stand for equity. No mincing of the words there. So
May I just jump in? Matt, I see you put a question, and one thing I was remiss, I did not share the composition of the equity committee. So there's myself, I'm the chair. Each of the associations, Bonita Unified Teachers Association, as well as CSEA, each recommended 2 of their representatives from their associations to sit on the committee. We have a representative parent from the elementary level, a representative parent from the middle school level and high school level. And then we also have students from each of the 3 high schools. And then Mark Rogers, who started with us simply as kind of our data expert, because again, that was what we wanted to tackle first, was how to collect information. He is quite passionate about this work, and he was attending regularly because of this data piece while we were working on things. And he's just sort of become a member because, as I said, he feels this is some place his heart is, and he's been very instrumental in kind of propelling our work as well. So that's who's on the committee.
That's fantastic. I early on in this meeting kind of had to hold back tears a little bit because I am just so happy. I'm so happy y'all are doing this, and I am so hopeful that we will be able to bring people either, I love that how you put that, Mr. Coulter, either close enough to the people experiencing this or close enough to the data. But I got to tell you, I shared that 3% of the population representing 10% of the referrals with quite a bit of folks during my school board campaign, saying like, I'm not comfortable with this percentage because this would be the percentage that I would be putting my daughter in. And I want to feel safe knowing that my daughter's not going to be elevated more frequently because she is a passionate little girl. And I just don't want her caught up in this web. And I will tell you that the more often than not response I got from people in the community and BUSD parents is that all I have to do is teach my daughter to obey or to be respectful, or, and the onus is always, I'm not going to say always, that's totally hyperbolic, I apologize. But too often the onus is put on kind of what Chloe said, is like, you got to learn to be perfect, right? Grow up and be perfect, and then you won't get caught into this systemic issue. So I know I don't want to get caught up in the weeds of that, the some people never change mentality, because there's so many people who will. But I'm just wondering how you navigate those dicey waters.
Mr. Coulter, I don't know if you want to take this one. I'll go first.
Well, I'll just jump in real quick. Thanks, Chloe. I got a dog in the fight too. You know, my son is at Gladstone now. Chloe knows my son. He started out at Sunrise, you know, and then through a series of events, ended up moving him over to the district, to BUSD. And I have that same concern, Brittany. You know what I mean? You know, my situation a little different. And I appreciate that you have the luxury that if you don't want to send your daughter to BUSD, you can. I kind of can't because I share custody with my son's mother. And so I had to kind of make a decision that I was going to really fight this fight and be, you know, it's the chicken and the pig want to help with breakfast. You know, the pig's all in, but the chicken can lay some eggs, you know. So I'm trying to look forward to the construction, which I know is a confrontation, because that is the line item, right? I mean, it's well, the onus is on you if he assimilates. If he doesn't, I was like, well, hold on a second, you know. We're not taking into consideration cultural differences, and I challenge on my campus, you know, and I have I think a respectful relationship with my administration, but I say, hey, there is no harm in understanding the deficits. And we all probably have been on campuses where people say we generally have good kids. Good means nothing to me. So it's not a specific, it's not a precise term. So if girls can't walk through a crowd of boys without fearing that they're going to be touched in a way that they don't think is appropriate, as these are some of the conversations I have with students who come to me, if derogatory language is being directed at anybody, it doesn't matter if it's one person or 50, then navigating this really is just bringing it to light and saying, you're going to have to validate. The onus is on me, just on me to validate my claim. The onus is actually on the predominant groups who say, we don't have a problem, you need to fit in. As I say, well, we still have other issues like mental health plaguing our schools. We have cheating and plagiarism plaguing our schools. So clearly, there are all kinds of mitigating factors that bring this notion of imperfection to a reality. And so I just don't think it's one of those kind of line up at the line of scrimmage moments, Brittany, I think, where there isn't a neat and clean way to do it. I had a colleague say to me today, I just don't know if I hope you feel supported. And I was like, hey, I don't need your support. There's a principal here that needs you to vie for these students. I need you to mentor. I need you to understand that that's part and parcel to the responsibility of an instructor. That is not a common paradigm. So I wish I had like some insurance I could offer you. I don't, but what I do like is that light is being shown. And this is now an established work. And I know from talking to enough of the people who matter in the decision-making part of this, that this isn't a flash in the pan. So can offer that at least.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
So I did want to add something as well. It's just that my mom and I have had this conversation before many, many times. I had the opportunity to go to school in the Chasey Joint as well, because that's where my stepdad teaches, and that's where him and my mom went to school. And if I went to school there, I would be able to I'll be able to go through things in a different way, so I wouldn't be going through and handling as much as the problems that I have at San Dimas. However, the trade-off would be the level of my education. I came from a private school for elementary and middle school, and so in coming from a private school, my mom specifically chose San Dimas so that I could have the best education possible that this area had to offer me. And so it was kind of like there's a trade-off that Black students have to deal with, and it's either you can get a really, really good education, but the price for that is quite possibly your mental health, in the fact that you're going to be hearing a lot of racism. And in talking to a lot of my friends recently, we began to notice some similarities, and this is across the state of California, not just in Bonita Unified, but as you get to the higher levels of classes, you're gonna see a lot more problems. And so when students hit their AP classes and the advanced courses, with students who are going to be, I don't want to say higher intellectual, but students who just work a whole lot and do everything, we actually tend to face a lot more racism, and we hear a lot more of the comments, which I find odd at times. And so it even gets to the point where we're discussing things in AP classes, and I've had to log off of a Zoom call so I can take a breather because I was 100% overwhelmed in the moment. My teacher actually texted me, privately chatted me to see if I was okay, because in our discussion, he could hear that I was close to tears. And so it's just that this is something that is always going to be there. And I don't know if it's so much as navigating the environment around it, as you have to understand, and okay, students, teachers, everybody generally knows where you'll see these kinds of things, what classes you may see these kinds of things. And so it's going to be taking a proactive approach to this, in that, okay, if you know this, let's work with these certain people ahead of time, maybe because they've had a specific amount of complaints, or let's talk to this person because, you know what, I'm hearing a lot of chatter about their class, because I know students, and we generally don't talk nice about our teachers because we're lazy, and that's just a fact. But there's also certain lines that we know that we're not supposed to cross. And if you hear students talking and these lines are being crossed, then I feel like this is something that really needs to be looked at.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love you bring it down to the personal things that we can do, right? Systemic changes are a slow moving ship, but conversations with our friends and with our neighbors and whatnot starts that ripple effect that I think is necessary. Isabel, let's hear what you've got to share, and then Amanda.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thanks to all of our speakers on this topic. I think this is really important to address, equity. Last time we talked about equity at large, but I think so much of it starts in educating our children and, the school system. So I have like a practical question, and then maybe a more abstract question. So to Ms. Black's comments about, we have the equity committee, and then the recommendations get forwarded to the executive cabinet, and then they get to the school board. So my first question is, how do we make sure that it doesn't get stuck at the executive cabinet? How do we get it like in front of the school board, like as soon as possible? Because, on the one hand, it sounds like the committee has made a lot of progress in the past year, but also, for students of color or students who are experiencing inequity, like this is very urgent, so like, how do we get this moving as quickly as possible? So that's my first question. And kind of, I don't know if it's a related question, but I guess that something that I'm wondering aloud, I'm wondering if anyone can speak to this, is are some of the challenges, or maybe as part of the holdup, like having to do with the fact that this issue might be seen as political? Like, we talk about equity as a buzzword, but also, I envision like, well, why don't people know about this? Like, why hasn't the superintendent like sent one of those mass letters to the whole community about what the equity committee is doing? But then I wonder, like, well, will that rile up a certain demographic? Like, is this too political? And so I don't know, those are kind of my two questions that I have.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to preempt you, Christine, if you wanted to jump in there.
No, actually, I was just out of respect because she'd mentioned me. I was turning my camera on, but can you tell that I have awful lighting here? It's a little scary, a little haunted house looking here. Sorry about that. No, Norman, go ahead and then I'll jump in.
Well, to the first question, Isabel, about how do we make sure this doesn't get stuck? I don't know that this will be a satisfactory answer, but this is what I can give you as somebody who's just on the ground, as a teacher who, Carl reached out to me recently, and it was the first time in my career, and I've been teaching since 2003, that a superintendent reached out to me to discuss something like this. All right. And we were able to talk on a level that gave me confidence that like, I'm not going to stop being me. I've never not rallied for these types of things because of my own journey, right? And when you have to spend 3 hours on a bus every day as a child just to get equity, like, I know that was one of the hardest things my mom ever did was I had to catch the RTD bus to a bus stop to catch a bus to Woodland Hills every day, and gangsters and running from people and the whole deal. So I'm passionate about this, but the fact that I have proximity to him, and his executive cabinet. I've had offline conversations with so many people, followed by, I don't swear by Twitter by any means, but I do appreciate the presence that I've seen from members of our district who make decisions. I gave a lecture to Colorado School of Mines in November talking about a different subject related to leadership. And there were members of our community and our leadership who actually attended the Zoom. That has zero to do with Bonita Unified. People are trying to learn. And I know that if this gets stuck, I have the bat phone, so to speak. So I have, that's something you don't always have, right? I mean, a lot of mistakes get made in the process of trying to make change sometimes because we burn bridges or we make assumptions. And I try to keep the work of bridge work very vital here, very vibrant. That's going to be key. I think things are going to get stuck if you get opposition from, say, a school board, or you get pushed back politically. But I just wanted to speak to that because I think the proximity is important. I don't know if that makes sense. And I realize we all have tread on the tires. Like, I'm relatively new here. So I understand that I come in with a little bit of the wide eyes, but I'm also, I don't, my wife will tell you in my old district, I'll stand the ground that needs to be stood, So there's that just on the first question. I've thought about the second one, but Chris, if you wanted to jump in on the first question about making sure things don't get stuck and that we rally with urgency, I'll shut up.
No, and I think what it is the committee just continues their work, and we continue to follow up, and we continue to bring it to the forefront. I don't think that there's any, as I said, I've been with the district for 33 years, and I've seen things unrelated to this sort of topic get stalled. Things and ideas arise out of what seems to be what's happening around us at the time, and then it sort of falls off and drifts away as people forget. I think I can say with assuredness that that's not the case with this. This is near and dear to the people at the top of our district. We didn't have to, Carl didn't have to call for the formation of a committee. It was something that he felt strongly about, and we are taking the action that we can take. I think the committee has done a great job of doing a lot. We've kind of outlined for you tonight the things that we've accomplished thus far, which is really a lot, particularly when you consider that this is being done by committee and looking from the input of various stakeholders, because we want to get it right. I think along those same lines, I think it was Brittany that said it so well a while ago, that change takes time. And in response to Isabel, the piece about political, I think we would be turning a blind eye to the idea that this has become a political topic, but that doesn't mean that we let politics stop our forward motion and our commitment to doing what we're doing. But we also, I think, understand that the change may have to go a little bit slower than those of us who are in this meeting right now, who are dedicated around this important work, would like to see it happen, because we also want to bring those people that we can touch and we can change their perspective. We want to educate them and bring them along. There's going to be people that we never change, no matter the amount of training we do. It is so ingrained in them. It's been their perspective and experience for so long. But then I do believe that there's a great number of people that may be hesitant, may have questions, may want to, as Norman and I have talked about and the committee's talked about, have these safe places where these courageous conversations can happen. It's putting all of those pieces in place so that we can get our message across, and to open minds and open hearts. And that may move a little bit more slowly than some of us would like to see that happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, last week I shared the big question of when do we compromise for the sake of progress, and when do we push at the risk of pushback? And I think you might hit the nail on the head with like time be the one thing that we've got to compromise a little bit on, is letting things take time, like you said, to make sure everything gets right. Let's quickly go to Amanda, and then Christopher, and then Crystal.
Sorry, so so I wanted to kind of like add in. So Brittany, I was just like listening to your concern with your daughter entering the school district. And so I think I've said, so my sons are mixed, they're Asian. So I don't think they will have as many conflicts, just from what I have heard from other parents. And my godsons are Taiwanese and they haven't had as many conflicts either, although they're in a predominantly Asian area. So maybe that's why, I don't know. But I know I've already heard from my sister who, my niece is also half white, half black. And she has, you know, the super crazy curly hair and she braids her hair for school because it's easier to maintain rather than having to try to do her hair every morning. And she actually got a letter from the preschool stating she cannot braid her hair. There's, you know, they're not allowed to have the beads in the hair. And she couldn't put the fun colors in there. And my sister was just so upset and ended up having to go in and sit down with the teacher. This is preschool. That's why I'm wondering, like, how can we help? I don't know. I guess as a mother, I want to help shield my child from having to experience that. But at the same time, I don't think that's going to be possible. You know, I've already heard so much as an adult from the community that we live in, and I moved here on purpose for the school district. And I know my sister actually wanted to send my niece to Bonita Unified through my address, because the school district is better than her Upland school district. So she wanted to give her daughter, you know, the best that she can, as Chloe was saying earlier. I think where I've come kind of as a parent is that, so my background, actually, I went to school to become a teacher. I decided not to get my credential because my friends that graduated just before me couldn't get jobs. They do have jobs now in Pomona, but that took about 3 years of them searching for a job to actually get hired. So I opted not to go that direction. But I did work with after school programs with Asian children that were learning the language, and like hearing the stuff that their teachers said to them was just heartbreaking to me as someone that was going in to be a teacher, because like their teachers are like, oh, you know, it's fine, you're just never, you know, if your parents don't speak English, you're just never going to get it, you know, because you don't hear it at home. And it's just some of this stuff was coming from teachers to the students. And I guess like in a way they may not think it's bad, but I think if you have parents involved a little bit more, especially on the younger levels, I'm just wondering if there's a way to arrange that, almost like a PTA, but a different group for parents, maybe, you know, even with parents that are allies that want to help their kid learn how not to, you know, act out on these microaggressions, how not to say these things. Oh, it was just a joke. I'm just joking. You know, that.
Correct me if you're wrong. I think Christine, you mentioned that you're looking into parent education, and it'll move that direction.
Yes, parent education and trainings and safe places to come and have these kind of conversations. And my hope would be that out of that would come a parent group, just like you described, Amanda.
I think that's great, yeah. Especially because it could be framed as that safe space, like Mr. Coulter talked about, being able to have those. You have to be able to have confrontational conversations, because that's the only way that you move people closer together.
Because a concern that I have though is like, if you wanted to like shift your kid from one classroom to another, that kind of targets your kid. So let's say one teacher is just continue either not shutting down racist comments or microaggressions within the classroom. So you opt to pull your child from that classroom, which is already difficult. How do you keep them from them being marked? Because then of course teachers talk, and then now your child is going to be marked as difficult. I don't know if there's an answer to that, but I don't know. That just as a parent, that is my biggest fear, because I saw my godson go through that. You know, he got marked as a difficult child because he got pulled from a classroom because the teacher kept pairing him with non-English speakers, and it was dragging down his grade because the teacher just didn't want to deal with the non-English speaking student. So they used him as the translator. So she pulled him from the classroom, only to find out later that other teachers were then marking him as a problem child, as a problem student, simply because they pulled him from a classroom with a teacher that just refused to work with the parents.
In hopes to give you a little bit of assurance, I mean, I shared Mr. Coulter used to be my teacher. I've known him in a couple of different phases of life, and his assurance assured me, right? The conversations that I've had with some on the executive board, on the school board, I've started to have more and more conversations with folks about this topic, because I am privileged enough. I will keep my child home if I think she will be emotionally harmed in this school district. And I'm not going to say I've 100% been convinced. I have a little bit longer to enroll her in kindergarten, but I have been assured regularly that administration does have this, as Christine put it, near and dear. So I think that issues won't elevate the same the way that perhaps you're describing in that sense. I've got to go to Christopher and Crystal so that we can give our panelists final words. Thank you so much, Christine, for coming. You have been so valuable, and I'm so lucky to have you here.
Good night. Thank you, everyone.
Good night. Okay, so Christopher and then Crystal. And then
yeah, thank you. I'll try to be brief because I know we're low on time. Yeah, I first wanted to just quickly thank Norman and Chris, as well as Chloe. And to get to the question, where I'm not a big fan of hearing change needs time. A broken heart might need time, but the change we want to see needs goals, and it needs tipping points. So I know Chris just left. So regarding goals, long-term, short-term benchmarks, tipping points that would like to be reached, what are some of those goals that the committee members can talk to us about?
Well, I think a good question, by the way, and pleasure to meet you, Christopher. Again, kind of late to the party, but not so much, because I've been dealing with this kind of thing all my life. You know, I was always, I hate to use the term tokenized, but you know, when you look around and you know, you're only African American male in these classes, and you know that there's smart people on that bus with you, but they're not in these classes, you start wondering about access. So tipping points for me, you know, again, going to data, not because I'm a big data person solely. You know, I'm very passionate. I'm philosophical, and I zoom out to 30,000 feet. But I think what I want to see, because I'm impatient, you know, with this stuff. It's not like we have this, we don't have this elaborate history in this country of this kind of stuff. So what I want to see is the tangibility. First of all, I want marginalized groups to feel, I don't want them to question sending their kids to these schools, right? Which means they have to be able to say, these are my concerns. I do want to send my kid to the school in my neighborhood. And you know, that's what a lot of people are going to say. They don't want to have to figure that thing out and sell their homes and such, you know? So we have to see the numbers change. I mean, I actually am, if that 3%, you know, from our WASC report, and we just finished WASC this year, if that's accurate, that just seems low. I mean, low in the sense that we have more potential than that. So you have to ask the question about what's not there, and say, are we not attracting these students? And when we are, how many of them are here simply because they're on placement and they have to go to San Dimas? Because we serve, like for instance, at the high school, more students who are in foster care than any other schools in the region, which you guys know. So one tipping point is going to be related to reversals in the discipline stuff, reversals in this trend away from our campus when students choose other schools or their families choose other schools over San Dimas, for instance, or over our district as a whole. When I go pick up my son from daycare, I don't see, you know, a whole lot of kids who look like him. So, and this isn't just a black and white issue, I realize that, but I do think when we look at test test taking and the certain classes that are either being avoided or simply not, the representation isn't there for certain groups. I think that these are the kind of things I'm looking for, because I have to be able to point to more than just my own subjective perceptions. Even though for everything that I study, I'm having to build out. This is why I'm thankful for the work of the committee, building out survey data, building out my own constructs for looking at data that other people tend to shy away from, right? We don't like to look at race stuff or ethnicity stuff, generally because people are afraid of what it will reveal. But we do have to look in the mirror at these things, and I think that's how we get there more quickly. And so maybe not an answer completely to your question, but I mean, that's what I'm trying to do to expedite.
Yeah, that's good. So Crystal, go ahead and share your quick question. And then Norman, if you could answer and give any last words.
So, hi, I'm Crystal. I'm Chloe's mom. I think that one of my biggest concerns / question is, in parenting, Chloe will just say for the past year that she's been a part of the committee, I've actually listened in on every single committee meeting she's been in, because she works. I mean, we have the privilege. She literally has a computer right next to my work computer at home, and we discuss all of the things that, I hear her classes, I hear the things that are said, and I see the things that are said. And so I think one of my biggest concerns / questions, but Christine's gone, is that when we say that change is going to take time and that some people are just never going to change because that's who they are, that's not enough. Like, I know that sounds terrible, but that's not enough, because these are children. So I don't want to become emotional, but when you're dealing with seniors and you've got depression, or high schoolers and they've got the weight of the world on their shoulders, that shouldn't be the case. We shouldn't tell them that it's going to take time for adults who are charged with their care to change. We should not have room in our district, in our society, not in our society, but we shouldn't have room in our district for people who are just not going to change. And I think that as a community, while we have allies and we have these calls, that's where I think that as a community, we have to charge and challenge that, this work continues. Because if I could tell you guys how many tears I've wiped from my child's eyes, and how many therapists we've gone through this year, and how many things we've heard, that's what the result of her speaking up has been. And it's hard, like, children shouldn't have to deal with these sorts of things, because in our home, race is always a conversation, because I'm Black, I'm a Mexican American, and I'm a female, and I'm in corporate America. My husband is a Black teacher. Like, these are conversations that we have every single day. And unfortunately, because there is a certain amount of privilege, I hate that word too, because it just people become so offended by it. But because there is a certain amount of privilege that these conversations don't have to be had, it basically continues to grow the ignorance. And it's hard, because, it's hard to tell your child that, some people are just ignorant and don't realize that this is what they're doing or this is what they're saying, because that's where, we don't have that time, because the ignorance continues to grow. And, when we say, yes, it's going to take time, or, there's an adult who is allowing it, or there's an adult who allows that culture to continue, you're also allowing that culture to continue and teaching that next generation that it's okay. And so even if that culture dies out, when that student comes back to teach at San Dimas, just using San Dimas, but, there's so many administrators and staff who are from San Dimas and have gone to that high school. So if they went to school and that culture was allowed, and they grew up thinking that was okay, and they come back then and they're in that community again, that culture is going to continue. So I think that, just stating that it's going to take time, this needs to be urgent, because mental health is such a huge issue. It's on the top of everybody's tongue, because we've just come almost through the pandemic, and it's been highlighted so much. But if we took that same concern for that mental health and said, wait a minute, what is the mental health of these marginalized students? Like, that's what the result of all of these issues and the diversity issues that we're dealing with in the school districts, that's what the end result of that is dealing with a next generation that is scarred, has trauma, and is basically going to continue the same cycle through.
Well, Crystal, I appreciate your passion, and I care, I had Chloe in my class and see you guys over at Sunrise. So, hey, I think, and when we talk about things taking time and you've been waiting your whole life, you know what I mean? I was in kindergarten and we were singing these Swahili songs, but that education and that and I'm speaking more from like a curricular standpoint. For instance, my Inglewood origins are the only reason that I got a lot of what I got, learned about history in a way, learned about leadership, positive modeling, that allowed me to see myself and not drop my chin, and not drop my eyes. My community did that for me. Whereas I can teach a group of honor sophomores at the high school where I serve, and they don't know who Emmett Till is. And they don't know that atrocity that occurred in Money, Mississippi. You know what I mean? They have no idea. Or, I took some risks in my old district out in Riverside Unified when people were discounting the protesting and saying that, people will protest for any reason at all. And I said, well, can you tell me what the reason is? And they couldn't. They said, I was like, no, because you've already made your mind up about these people and you don't understand the decades and decades and decades of abuse, the centuries of abuse. I used to go through the math and I'd say, so a woman gives birth to a child who gives birth to a child who gives birth to a child. This goes on for 15 generations, 15 times 20 in these people. And that's modest. The best thing they can promise their children is slavery. And that's an origin that plants a seed, right? That produces the system. So I say all that to say this, when this year, there were two conversations that I wanted to be, it only happened twice, but I saw something that could have a lot of efficacy. One of them occurred in like November. It was a seen and heard conversation because there was so much complaining about COVID and the effect that it was having both on the ability to teach students and by the students on their ability to learn. And it was so much shrouded, but nobody was talking to each other. So I said, let's have a seen and heard conversation. What do you mean, Mr. Coulter? I said, hey, look, if you guys come prepared to speak, I'll make sure representatives from our staff, faculty, and administration show up too. And sure, they'll listen to you, but I also want you to hear from the perspective of a principal and how they're experiencing education in this season. A staff, our attendance clerk, all these people. And it was really just crosstalk. It was ability to be seen and to see. And in the same way that happened there, and it happened again in the spring, I did this MVPs conversation. I invited as many people as I could, and I said, who are the most valuable players in the life of a student? This, all right, trick question, right? The student is an MVP for him or herself, but it's getting the teacher, getting the administrator, getting the mental health professional, getting the co-teacher, the person who's the carrier for the caseload for the kids that have 504s and IEPs, getting all of them in a room and being able to talk meaningfully about the reality. That is not happening. We assume that the conversations are happening, but they aren't. And when they don't, especially about issues like race, that's when you begin to, you romanticize and you start to think, well, in time. But like you articulated, Christopher, time doesn't heal the wounds by itself. In fact, what we see is that in 2021, we're still fighting strange battles, right? So what has to happen is confrontation. Now, these conversations don't have to be volatile, but if we're not norming those meetings and creating those forums and creating a consistency where this isn't quarterly, no, it's monthly. Who's there? Everybody's there. Why? Because equity is on the shield, and we have to mean it, say it, and then activate a consistency that allows people to not hide, and that's where things get muddy. But that's the work that has to be done. And that's what ends up being the courageous step. And to a lot of people, conversation sounds touchy-feely, but it can be crafted in a way. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, South Africa, there was no way South Africa survives if they didn't figure out a way to bring perpetrators and victims into the same space. This is not new. It's only new here. We can apply these things to education. But the whole opting out, teachers can't be allowed to opt out of these conversations the way they do. They don't go to the meetings that they don't want to go to. Well, you know, this is the new pedagogical in service is to be able to do the very thing that we teach our kids in English class, civil discourse. If adults can't do it, we're lost. So I think we have a lot of work cut out for us, to just kind of speak to what you said, Crystal. But it's the whole don't grow weary of well doing, and don't be afraid to buckle up for safety, because it's bumpy. I mean, we didn't get here overnight. Bonita didn't become what it is. It's not a bad district, but there's a lot of ignorance, and we're in new space. So, you know, I just appreciate this platform. Even this is a step forward. This is unprecedented for me. I've never seen this interest in a district like this, with a demographic like ours. So I do think this is, you know, something that I can finally feel like I'm not on an island, man. I'm with all of you. I'm with the equity committee. We have a superintendent that said to my face what he values, and it's all of these things. And I get to hold him to account, and he can hold me account, and so forth and so on. So
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Coulter, for joining us. I mean, I think
Norman now, Brittany.
have you seen me oscillate? Like sometimes I'm like, you're Norman, but then it's like, oh, Mr. Coulter, I have a question. I've called you Norman at least twice in this meeting. I tried. But I think that the compromise of time is not a compromise of like, let's just wait. Like we keep moving, right? So like I said, we need to know when that's before the school board, and we need to call and make sure that the voices that call and say that, you know, this is divisive and let's not stir the pot. Like we say the pot needs to be stirred in order for some souls to settle, right? And we do not compromise on our efforts. I don't know. I made a very simple request back last summer, have more diverse literature entered our elementary classrooms. Like that is an easy thing. Can we buy and donate those to the little libraries across the community or the libraries in our classrooms? And do we get off this call and text the BUSD families that we know that say, hey, have you heard of the equity committee and you following what they're doing? Because I mean, Matt shared in the chat, like this is not known enough, and we can be the advocates that make it known to make sure that our little ripples help that slow steering ship go a little bit faster or a lot faster. And I gotta have hope. All right, Norman, you're welcome to stay on. Anyone who joined this conversation, feel free to stay on. We do have some Bonita Democratic Council club business to get to. And I always take a half an hour away from it, and I will figure out how to not do that. But I just like talking about this stuff so much. And it's just so important. So I hope we can whiz through club business real fast. Thanks, Matt.